The Korean winter of 1950 gnawed at Elias Whitaker's bones like a relentless dog. At 62, his joints ached worse than ever, stiffened by the sub-zero winds howling through the jagged peaks of the Chosin Reservoir. The air reeked of diesel fumes and distant cordite, a bitter reminder of the war that had dragged him from his quiet garage in rural Ohio back to a battlefield he thought he'd left behind. Eli, a retired mechanic who'd fixed tractors and jalopies through the Great Depression, had volunteered to drive supply trucks for the Army, hauling ammo and rations to the front. The younger soldiers called him Pops, their smirks dismissing his gray hair and weathered hands as relics of a bygone era. They didn't know he'd kept tanks running during the last war, or that his knack for coaxing life from broken machines had saved lives before. Now, those skills felt useless. The Chinese offensive had swept through like a blizzard, shattering the American lines. Eli's truck, a battered deuce-and-a-half, lay overturned a mile back, its axle snapped in a panicked retreat. He'd been guiding 4 stragglers, 2 wounded privates, a jittery radio operator, and a hard-nosed sergeant barely old enough to shave, when the enemy's artillery fire forced them off the road. They'd stumbled through knee-deep snow, the crunch of their boots drowned by the thunder of mortars, until they found refuge in a wrecked M39 armored utility vehicle, half buried in a snowdrift beside a frozen creek. The M39 was a hulking relic, its tracks blown off, its hull cracked like an eggshell. Snow piled against its sloped armor, camouflaging it from the Chinese patrols scouring the valley. Inside, the air was a damp chill, smelling of rust and sweat. Eli crouched near the rear hatch, his breath fogging in the dim light filtering through a jagged tear in the roof. The vehicle's interior was a cramped maze of twisted metal and dangling wires, barely enough room for the 5 of them to huddle. Private Malone, a lanky kid with a gut wound, groaned softly, his face pale as the snow outside. Private Hensley, leg shattered by shrapnel, clenched his teeth to stifle his pain. Corporal Davies, the radio operator, fiddled nervously with a dead headset, his fingers trembling. Sergeant Cutler, all of 23, glared at Eli, his voice sharp as the wind. "You got us into this mess, Pops," Cutler hissed, his M1 carbine resting across his knees. "Told you that shortcut was a death trap. Now we're stuck in this tin can, waiting for the Reds to skin us alive." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't snap back. He'd suggested the back road to avoid an ambush, relying on his memory of maps and terrain from his World War II days. It hadn't worked out. Chinese scouts had spotted them anyway, but he wasn't about to let Cutler's scorn shake him. "Keep your voice down, Sergeant," Eli said, his Ohio drawl steady. "Sound carries in this valley. You want to live, we need to stay hid." Cutler snorted but fell silent. Outside, the crunch of boots on snow grew louder, then faded, a patrol passing too close for comfort. Eli's heart thudded, his calloused fingers tracing the cold steel of the M39's wall. He'd seen war before, but this felt different. The Chinese were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. The valley was a kill zone, hemmed by rocky cliffs and choked with snow, the distant rumble of tanks signaling their advance. If the enemy found them, there'd be no mercy. Malone whimpered, clutching his bandaged side. "I ain't gonna make it, Mr. Whitaker. It's too damn cold, and my gut's burnin'." Eli knelt beside him, ignoring the ache in his own knees. "You're tougher than you think, son. Stay quiet, and we'll get you through this." He adjusted the kid's blanket, torn from a supply crate, and checked the bandage. It was soaked but holding, for now. Hensley, propped against a crate, muttered through gritted teeth, "They're gonna find us. This heap ain't no fortress." "It's what we got," Eli said, his voice firm but kind. He glanced at the M39's interior, his mechanic's eye cataloging every detail. The shattered radio console, the toolbox wedged under a bench, the fuel cans stacked in a corner. His mind raced, piecing together possibilities. Back in 44, he'd rigged a stalled Sherman tank to limp back to base under German fire. This was no different. Just another machine, another problem to solve. Davies, the radio operator, looked up, his eyes wide. "I heard something, footsteps again. They're circling back." Eli pressed a finger to his lips, straining to listen. The wind carried faint voices, clipped and foreign, mingling with the crunch of snow. The Chinese were methodical, sweeping the valley for stragglers. The M39's snow-covered hull might fool their eyes, but a sharp scout could spot tracks or hear Malone's groans. Eli's mind churned. They couldn't stay here forever. Malone and Hensley needed a medic, and the cold would kill them all by morning. "Pops, you got any bright ideas?" Cutler's tone dripped with doubt. "Or you just gonna tinker with this junk till we're dead?" Eli met his gaze, unflinching. "I've kept men alive in worse spots than this, Sergeant. You want to lead? Go ahead. But if you're following, let me think." Cutler's jaw twitched, but he didn't argue. Eli turned back to the toolbox, prying it open with a quiet creak. Inside were pliers, a wrench, some wire, and a half-empty can of motor oil, scraps, but enough to work with. His fingers, gnarled from years of wrench turning, moved with purpose. He wasn't just a driver. He was a fixer, and this wreck was his workshop. The M39's fuel system caught his eye. The cans in the corner still held diesel, and the vehicle's lines, though damaged, weren't fully ruptured. An idea flickered, dangerous, but possible. If he could siphon the fuel, rig a distraction, maybe they could slip away. The Chinese were close, their tanks rumbling louder now, maybe a mile off. But the valley's terrain, with its narrow passes and rocky outcrops, could be their ally if they played it right. "Davies," Eli whispered. "You know Morse?" The corporal nodded, confused. "Yeah, but the radio's busted." "Don't need a radio yet. Just need you to remember a signal." Eli's mind was already mapping the valley, recalling the terrain from his drive in. There was a ridge half a mile east, high ground where UN forces might still be holding. If they could signal for help or draw the enemy away, they had a shot. Another crunch of snow, closer now. Eli froze, his hand on the wrench. The voices were clearer. 2, maybe 3 soldiers, poking through the wreckage nearby. A beam of light flickered through the M39's tear, sweeping the interior. Eli motioned for silence, his heart pounding. Malone bit his lip, stifling a groan. Hensley's eyes were wide, his hand clutching a pistol he could barely lift. The light lingered, then moved on. The voices faded, but Eli knew they'd be back. The patrol was too thorough, and the M39 wasn't invisible. He looked at his group, scared, wounded, doubting, and felt the weight of their lives on his shoulders. They saw him as an old man, a has-been, but he'd been underestimated before. In '44, a colonel had laughed when Eli jury-rigged a tank's engine with fence wire and spit. That tank had carried a squad to safety. He could do this again. "Listen up," Eli whispered, his voice low but steady. "We ain't dying in this box. I got a way out, but it's gonna take all of us. You trust me, we'll make it." Cutler's eyes narrowed, but Malone nodded weakly. Hensley grunted. "Better than freezing." Davies whispered. "What's the plan, Pops?" Eli didn't answer yet. The enemy was too close, and the cold was tightening its grip. But as the rumble of tanks grew louder, shaking the M39's hull, Eli's mind locked onto a spark of hope. The Chinese had numbers, but he had no how. And in this frozen hell, that just might be enough. Elias Whitaker's breath hung in the frigid air inside the wrecked M39, the cold biting deeper as night settled over the chosen reservoir. The distant growl of Chinese tanks vibrated through the snow-buried hull, a reminder that time was slipping away. Eli's group, Privates Malone and Hensley, Corporal Davies, and Sergeant Cutler, huddled in the cramped space, their faces etched with fear and doubt. Malone's gut wound seeped through his bandage, his shallow breaths fogging faintly. Hensley's shattered leg trembled under a tattered blanket, and Davies clutched his useless radio like a lifeline. Cutler's eyes bored into Eli, skeptical but silent, waiting for the old mechanic to prove he was more than a relic. Eli's hands, steady despite the chill, worked the toolbox's contents. Pliers, a wrench, a coil of wire, and a can of motor oil. His mind churned, piecing together a plan born from decades of fixing what others called hopeless. The Chinese patrols were closing in, their boots crunching through the snow every half hour, their voices sharp and searching. The M39's cracked hull and snow cover kept them hidden for now, but Malone's groans and the group's dwindling warmth meant they couldn't stay put. Eli's plan hinged on the valley's terrain and the enemy's own tools, Those tanks, rumbling closer, could be their ticket out if he played it right. "We're gonna make 'em look the wrong way," Eli whispered, his Ohio drawl calm but firm. "Get him chasing a ghost so we can slip east to that ridge. UN boys might still be holding it." Cutler snorted, his carbine tight in his grip. "You're dreaming, Pops. We got 2 wounded, no ammo worth a damn, and you think we can outfox a whole company?" "I don't need to outfox 'em all," Eli said, prying open a fuel can with a quiet scrape. "Just enough to buy us time." He pointed to the M39's damaged fuel line, a tangle of rubber and steel near the rear hatch. "These tanks run on diesel, same as this heap. I can rig a fire, small, controlled, to look like a wreck burning out west. Patrols'll swarm it, thinking it's fresh. We go east while they're distracted." Davies, wide-eyed, leaned forward. "A fire? In this cold? They'll see right through it." "Not if it smells like a tank cooking," Eli said. He held up the motor oil can. "Mix this with diesel, light it up, it'll smoke like a busted engine. Seen it fool Krauts in 44. Reds ain't no smarter." Hensley grunted, pain lacing his voice. "And if they don't buy it, we're sitting ducks." Eli met his gaze. "Then we're no worse off than now. But I'm betting they'll bite. They're stretched thin, hunting stragglers. A fire's a beacon they can't ignore." Malone, pale and shivering, whispered, "Can you make it quick?" "I ain't got long." Eli's heart clenched. He'd seen boys like Malone before, bleeding out in foxholes, their eyes pleading for hope. "Hang on, son. We're moving soon." He turned to the group. "Davies, you'll signal when we reach the ridge. Morse, like I said. Hensley, you and Malone stay quiet. Save your strength. Cutler, you're on watch. Any noise outside, you tell me." Cutler's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Eli set to work, his fingers deft despite the cold. He siphoned diesel from the fuel cans, mixing it with motor oil in an empty ammo tin. The acrid smell filled the M39, stinging their noses. Using wire and a torn rag, he crafted a crude fuse, tucking it into the tin. The plan was simple but risky. Crawl out, set the fire in a wrecked jeep they'd pass 200 yards west, then double back through the creek bed to head east. The snow would cover their tracks if they moved fast. Outside, the wind howled, masking the faint clatter of Eli's tools. But a new sound cut through, a low, guttural hum. Tanks, closer now, their tracks grinding snow and ice. A patrol's voices followed, sharp and urgent, maybe 100 yards off. Eli froze, motioning for silence. The group held their breath, Malone biting his lip to stifle a groan. A flashlight beam swept past the M39's tear, lingering on the snow outside. Eli's pulse hammered, his hand gripping the wrench like a weapon. The beam moved on, the voices fading. Eli exhaled, his mind racing. The tanks were too close, maybe a quarter-mile now. The fire had to draw them west, or they'd roll right over the M39. He turned to Cutler. "We need a decoy spot. That jeep's our best shot. You with me?" Cutler hesitated, then nodded. "If this goes south, Pops, it's on you." "Always has been," Eli said, his voice steady. He handed Davies the wire cutters. "If I ain't back in 10, cut east anyway. Follow the creek bed. It'll hide you." Davies swallowed hard. "You're going out there? Alone?" "Need Cutler's eyes here," Eli said. "And I know how to set this right." Truth was, he didn't trust Cutler's nerve, and the wounded couldn't move yet. He'd crawled through mud under German fire before. This was just another job. Eli slipped out the rear hatch, the cold hitting like a hammer. The snow crunched under his boots, but the wind covered the sound. He moved low, clutching the ammo tin, the fuse tucked inside. The jeep lay half-buried in a drift, its frame charred from an earlier hit. Perfect. He poured the diesel oil mix over the engine block, the smell sharp and heavy. His fingers, numb from cold, fumbled with a flint from his pocket. A spark caught, then died. He cursed under his breath, trying again. The second spark took, a small flame licking the rag. The fire flared, black smoke curling into the sky. Eli ducked back, retracing his steps to the M39. Halfway there, a shout rang out, "Chinese, close." He dropped into the snow, heart pounding, as boots crunched past, drawn to the fire. The tank's rumble shifted, veering west. It was working. Back inside the M39, Eli found Cutler's eyes wide. "They're moving," the sergeant whispered. "Damn, Pops, you pulled it off." "Not yet," Eli said, catching his breath. "We gotta move now. Creek bed, east, to the ridge. Can you carry Malone?" Cutler nodded, slinging his carbine. Davies helped Hensley, who gritted his teeth against the pain. Eli took point, checking the hatch. The fire's glow lit the western sky, and the enemy's shouts were distant now. The creek bed, icy and narrow, was their path. It'd be hell to navigate with 2 wounded, but it was their only shot. As they prepared to move, Malone grabbed Eli's sleeve, his voice weak. "Why you doing this, old man? You coulda stayed home." Eli paused, the weight of years in his eyes. "Fixin' things is what I do, son. Machines, people, don't matter. You don't quit when the job ain't done." The group fell silent, the words sinking in. The tank's rumble faded west, but the cold and the enemy were still out there. Eli's plan had bought them time, but the ridge was half a mile of frozen hell away. He looked at his ragtag crew, their trust fragile but growing. The fire was burning, the enemy distracted. Now came the hard part. The chosen reservoir's icy grip tightened as Elias Whitaker led his group through the snow-choked creek bed, the wind howling like a banshee across the Korean valley. The distant glow of the decoy fire still drew the Chinese westward, its black smoke a fading smear against the night sky. Eli, at 62, felt every step in his aching joints, but his resolve burned hotter than the cold could quench. Behind him, Sergeant Cutler carried Private Malone, whose gut wound left him pale and barely conscious. Corporal Davies supported Private Hensley, his shattered leg dragging through the snow. The crunch of their boots was muffled by the wind, but every sound felt like a betrayal in the silent, deadly valley. Eli's plan had given them a window, but it was closing fast. The ridge, half a mile east, was their hope. UN forces might still hold it, and Davies could signal for rescue with Morse code if they reached high ground. The creek bed, flanked by rocky outcrops, offered cover but was treacherous with ice and jagged stones. Eli's memory of the terrain, honed from studying maps during his World War II days, guided them. He knew the ridge's slope, the way the creek bent toward it. His mechanic's mind, used to fixing the unfixable, now pieced together their survival. "Keep low," Eli whispered, his breath fogging. "Stay in the creek. Tracks'll show on the banks." His voice, steady despite the cold, anchored the group. Cutler, for once, didn't argue, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. Malone's head lolled, his groans faint. Hensley cursed under his breath with each step, but Davies kept him moving, his radio slung over his shoulder. The cold was a living thing, clawing through their coats, numbing fingers and faces. Eli's hands, calloused from years of wrench-turning, gripped the wrench he'd taken from the M39's toolbox, a makeshift weapon if it came to that. The Chinese were distracted, but not gone. A shout echoed faintly from the west, followed by the grind of tank tracks. The decoy fire was still working, but patrols could double back. Time was their enemy as much as the cold. Halfway to the ridge, Hensley stumbled, his bad leg buckling. Davies caught him, but the clatter of rocks echoed in the quiet. Eli froze, scanning the darkness. A flashlight beam flickered 200 yards west, near the decoy fire's fading glow. Voices followed, sharp, urgent. The Chinese were spreading out again, their search methodical. Eli's heart pounded. They were exposed in the creek bed, with no cover but shadows. "Down," Eli hissed, dropping to his knees. The group followed, Malone's ragged breathing the only sound. The beam swept closer, then veered north. Eli waited, counting seconds, his mind racing. They couldn't outrun a patrol, not with 2 wounded. But the ridge was close, maybe 300 yards. If they could reach it, Davy's Moore signal might bring a chopper or a patrol. Eli's plan wasn't just escape, it was a gamble on hope. "Davies," Eli whispered. "You ready with that signal?" Davies nodded, clutching the flashlight he'd scavenged from the M39. "Got it. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. If we hit the ridge, I'll flash it." "Good," Eli said. "Cutler, keep Malone steady. Hensley, you lean on Davies. We move fast now." Cutler's eyes met Eli's, no longer mocking. "You're crazy, Pops, but I'm in." Eli gave a tight nod, then led them forward, his boots slipping on the icy creek bed. The ridge loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. But as they closed the distance, a new sound stopped them cold, a low, guttural rumble. A Chinese tank, closer than before, its tracks grinding through the snow. Headlights swept the valley, cutting through the darkness like knives. Eli's stomach sank. The decoy had drawn most of the enemy west, but this tank was too close, maybe patrolling the ridge itself. "Get behind that rock," Eli pointed to a boulder jutting from the creek's edge. The group scrambled, Cutler dragging Malone, Davies hauling Hensley. The tank's lights passed within 50 yards, its engine a deafening roar. Eli pressed against the rock, his wrench slick with sweat despite the cold. The tank paused, its turret swiveling. A voice barked orders, and boots hit the snow, soldiers dismounting. Eli's mind raced. They were pinned, the ridge so close yet untouchable. The tank's presence meant the Chinese suspected stragglers nearby. Malone's breathing grew shallower, his life slipping away. Eli looked at his group, their faces pale and desperate, and felt the weight of their trust. He'd been underestimated his whole life, by officers in 44, by the young bucks in this war. But he wasn't done yet. "Davies," Eli whispered, "you still got that wire from the M39? Davies nodded, pulling a coil from his pocket. Eli's eyes flicked to the tank, its exhaust puffing in the cold. An idea sparked, reckless but possible. "I'm gonna draw 'em off. You get to the ridge, flash that signal. Don't wait for me." Cutler grabbed his arm. "You're nuts, old man. They'll cut you down." "Maybe," Eli said, his voice calm. "But I ain't letting these boys die." He handed Cutler the wrench. "Keep 'em safe." Before Cutler could argue, Eli slipped away, moving low along the creek bed. He looped the wire into a crude snare, his fingers numb but precise. The tank was idling, its crew scanning the ridge. Eli crept to a snow-covered bush, 30 yards from the tank, and tossed a rock. It clattered against a stone, loud in the quiet. The tank's turret swung toward the sound, its light blinding. Soldiers shouted, boots crunching closer. Eli lit a match, the last from his pocket, and touched it to the wire's oil-soaked end. A small flame flared, smoke curling up. He tossed it toward the bush, praying it looked like a signal. The soldiers shouted, running toward it, the tank lumbering behind. Eli bolted back to the creek, his heart hammering. The Chinese were chasing his ghost, but it wouldn't last. He caught up to the group, now at the ridge's base. Davies was already climbing, Hensley slung over his shoulder. Cutler carried Malone, his face grim. Eli pushed them up, the snow slipping under their boots. At the ridge's crest, Davies knelt, flashing the SOS with his light. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The valley was silent now, the tank's rumble fading as it chased Eli's decoy. Minutes dragged like hours. Malone's breathing stopped, his hand limp in Cutler's. Eli's chest tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes on the sky. Then, a faint thump of rotors broke the silence, a UN chopper, drawn by the signal. It descended, its spotlight bathing the ridge. Medics leapt out, taking Hensley and Malone's body. Cutler helped Davies aboard, then turned to Eli. "You did it, Pops," Cutler said, his voice thick. "Saved us." Eli shook his head, his eyes on Malone's still form. "Not all of us." The chopper lifted off, carrying them to safety. Below, the valley lay quiet, the decoy fire dead, the Chinese none the wiser. Eli's hands, scarred and steady, had turned junk into salvation. Back at base, Cutler told the story, and the men listened, no longer calling him Pops with a smirk. Eli didn't care for the praise. He'd fixed what he could, as always. Years later, Cutler, now a captain, taught recruits about Chosen, about an old mechanic who outwitted an army with wire and guts. Eli, back in Ohio, never spoke of it, but his eyes held the truth. Age was no weakness, and a man's worth was in his deeds. In the quiet of his garage, he fixed engines, each turn of the wrench a reminder that some things, courage, duty, never broke.